Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wyss. I'm joined as ever by Jonathan Fadugba. Jonathan, how's it going?
Hi Steve, hi everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm doing well. I'm doing pretty well. It's the third round of Allsvenskan. We're getting into quite a nice rhythm. We've had a big week just gone, haven't we, Steve? And things are good. So how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. A bit stiff after my first cricket match of the season, but apart from that, I can't complain. Got to keep soldiering on. And round 3 of Allsvenskan has just happened. And what sort of stuck out to you from round 3's results?
Yeah, well, on today's show, we've got a very special episode for you. We're going for something a bit different. We did mention it on Twitter at Nordic Football if you don't follow us, so make sure you do. We are going for something a little bit different on this episode. We're going to get deep down and dirty. We're going to get very, very tactical on this one. We're going to have a deep dive into some trends that we've noticed in Allsvenskan, Steve, because there have been a few interesting trends emerging even after 3 weeks. So before we do that, I'm going to just read out the scores for this week, because we're not going to have our traditional podcast this week where we sort of talk about every team and talk about the latest controversies and dramas. We are going to put that all to one side for a very deep dive, as I say. So I'll just run through the scores, and Steve, you may have 1 or 2 comments about some of these games as well, but we'll keep it quite brief. So on the Saturday, IFK Göteborg lost again, 3rd defeat of the season. They have now lost every single game, and they're bottom of the table, losing 2-1 at home to Sirius. On the Sunday, Varberg 1, Djurgården 3. Norrköping 2, Halmstad 1. Norrköping getting some points on the board. Kalmar 1, Örebro 0, so another good result for Kalmar. And Örebro down the bottom of the table, just with 1 point now from 3 games. It's not been a great start for Örebro. Malmö 1, Östersunds 1, a massive shock really in terms of the bookmakers. I think, Steve, you had talked about on the bonus pod the odds for this game. Östersunds managed to defy the odds, getting a draw at Champions Malmö, even with 10 men. And AIK 2, Hammarby 0. AIK winning the big Stockholm derby. And then on Monday, Elfsborg 1, Mjällby 0, which was one of our tips on the bonus pod. Elfsborg to beat Mjällby. And IFK 2, Degerfors 3, a bit of an upset there, which we will talk about later on in this show. But, Steve, did you have any games that stood out to you there that just caught your eye, especially?
Yeah, obviously the IFK game, which we're going to talk about in depth later. Malmö not winning was a huge surprise to me, and I think quite a lot of other people, like you said, there were big odds there. Were Östersund. The draw would have been a big price, but it's going to be a bit of a different episode this time. We're not going to be talking about the usual controversies and stuff. Fantasy as well, a little bit of a backseat. Although I am actually in the top 10 in our league. I know now why you want to do this deep dive, Jonathan, because to avoid my gloating of my current position. The 1 week where I'm actually high. But anyway, so do you know what? We were talking, weren't we? I mentioned to you, I think after round 2, after watching a few games, I was like, how many effing teams in this league use a 3-4-3 formation? Just every match I was watching, someone was using it. And it just stuck out to me because, you see a few of them around, don't you? But it honestly felt like every other team was using one. And I thought this is in my head, but we have done a little bit of research, and it's a bit more widespread than you think.
It is indeed, and this is going to be the topic for this podcast. Well done there, by the way. Crowbarring in your reference to fantasy football. You've had a pretty good week, to be fair. I'm quite surprised you're so high. So well done to you there. And I've had a bit of a dip this week. Unfortunately, my big mistake was benching Adeg Benro. But the big trend we've noticed in Allsvenskan is this rise, this tactical theory, the rise of the 3-4-3, the rise of the 3-5-2 formation. Now, of all the teams this past week, 9 of the 16 teams in the league played either a 3-5-2 or a 5-3-2 or a 3-4-3 variation. So that is obviously 56% of the league. Now, I don't know how that compares, obviously, to other leagues in Europe, but that is a pretty high percentage, considering the overwhelming, probably tactical shape in European football, and maybe even world football, is 4-2-3-1 for many, many years. or a 4-3-3, maybe a 4-4-2. But those are the dominant formations, aren't they, Steve? But this is the rise in Sweden of a 3-4-3, which we've really found quite interesting. And from a tactical point of view, we're going to do a deep dive into this week. We're going to try and explain and maybe lift the lid on why so many teams are playing these formations. So on this episode, what we're going to do is we are making it into a video, aren't we, Steve? And you want to maybe just explain where listeners can, different ways they can view this episode and the concept behind it, how they can enjoy it.
Yes, obviously this episode is on all our normal platforms, but I would recommend, if you can, to watch this on YouTube, because there will be some sections where there's some visual aspects which we certainly will do our best to explain, but really are best seen on the big screen if possible. So it might be a case of you listening to it and there's certain sections that you're like, what did he quite mean there? And you might want to sort of look back on the YouTube video section and you might understand a bit more. It's a little bit of a work in progress for us here. It's almost a little bit of an experiment for us that we can do this sort of YouTube video episode as well. But yeah, I would recommend, if you can, then do watch it on the YouTube channel, and subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already.
Yes, visually it will work probably a little bit better on the YouTube. If you can't listen to it, if you can't watch it, then listen in, and hopefully some of the concepts are familiar to you. The 3-4-3, 3-5-2, that kind of thing. But we are going to try and explain it now. So let's get into this show, Steve. Like you said, it's a bit of an experiment. And do give us your feedback on Twitter at Nordic Football. I'd be keen to hear what you think. And I hope for people who don't really maybe understand tactical theory, maybe you've come across different formations in the past and you're not entirely sure, which ones are better. Maybe you play Football Manager and you've got different theories yourself, and you might have different ideas. This could be hopefully the show that you can, get some ideas across and maybe learn one or two things or get a few different perspectives. I'm going to kick off this, Steve, by just looking at, as we say, the different formations. So we've got 56% of the teams in Allsvenskan playing one of these formations. So let's just go through the most recent round. We mentioned the scores this week, and looking into it, I'm going to name you the teams. 9 Allsvenskan teams played in one of these formations this past week. In Mjällby, Kalmar, IFK Göteborg, Degerfors, Norrköping, Varberg Boys, Halmstad, Sirius, and Östersund. And that's a huge percentage, Steve. I don't know if you find that very, very interesting that there's so many different teams are playing in these different formations, but it really did surprise me. And we're going to, in part 3, talk about IFK Degerfors, because that's the key game, really. That was the clash of a 3-4-3 against the sort of 5-3-2, 3-5-2 of IFK. So that's kind of like the key focal point of this discussion, this podcast, looking at that game and giving a kind of a match analysis and a bit of a tactical breakdown. And then, we will basically decide which formation we prefer out of the two. And in part 2, we're going to talk about a 3-4-3 or a 3-5-2 against a 4-4-2 shape and the different, weaknesses and strengths. But for now, Steve, you've sort of identified this trend and we talked about it off air. Which teams have you got that you've seen play in this formation that have caught your eye so far?
Who hasn't played it? But fundamentally, they all have a few slight differences. The one thing they all have in common is these formations play with 3 centre-backs. No matter what way around it, there's always 3 centre-backs in this system. So that's where it originates from. But I certainly noticed the newly promoted side Degerfors came up with a 3-4-3 that really caught my eye. Varberg play a different sort of variation of it as well. And obviously Norrköping are the side that I fully expected to be in this sort of system, because Norling was known for sort of something similar at IFK, wasn't he? So those are the 3 that sort of caught my eye straight away. But there's been a few surprising teams using it as well. So I'm actually going to start here, Jonathan, asking you about a team that used this system. It's Östersund, and they kind of tweak around a few ways around this, but 5-3-2 is probably the most well-known of the systems that contain 3 centre-backs worldwide, really. If you say 5-3-2, people know what you're talking about in general. But let's go briefly here. How does a 5-3-2 work?
Yeah, good question. And I think, we're going to start with Östersund because they've been one of the surprise packages so far in this opening 3 rounds. A point at Malmö was a huge result. No one expected that. And obviously the week before, a 5-0 win against Örebro. This is a team that's been widely tipped to go down, Steve, and their manager Amir Azrafshan has faced some criticism in his early days in the job. But what I've done here is I've shared the screen, so hopefully you can see this right now. And we're going to look at the way in which Ostersund has been able to take a very weak squad. To be honest, they've got quite a lot of players who on paper probably they've been predicted to go down. For example, people are thinking that they're not going to do too well this season. They've had real troubles. I'm reading this week that they've had to sort of borrow money to be able to pay the salaries. There's a lot of different talks about how they're going to survive this season, that kind of thing. So what they've been able to do with this really, really small squad. They've got Charlie Colcott is refusing to play, so essentially, according to reports. He's now training with Coventry City. So they've got a really, really tight, weak squad, really, to be honest. Very light in numbers. But what Azrafshan has done is he's gone for this formation, Steve, and it is a 3-5-2. So this is probably the good entry point to get into it. Now, what is a 3-5-2? Well, essentially, it's a formation where you have sort of 3 centre-backs. You've got 2 wide players as wing-backs. In this case, Patrick Capozzo and Felix Horberg. You've got Fritzen, Sliwan Cambo, and Arhin in midfield. It's varied a little bit. Arhin didn't start the first games, but he's come into the team. He got sent off against Malmo at the weekend, but he's come in. So you've got 3 in midfield, 5 at the back, and then you've got 2 up front. Blair Turgot's been the main man. Then you've got Gino Baptiste and Nebiu Perry have kind of swapped places at times, but Turgot's really been the main man up front. And so this structure has been a really, really solid formation for them, and it's allowed them to take quite a small, weak squad and actually turn it into something that is quite tactically flexible and quite solid and quite good, isn't it, Steve? And you've got some theories in terms of the strengths of a 3-5-2.
Yeah, I think first thing I've got to say there, and you might even demonstrate this to us while I'm talking, that it can become a back 5 if you want it to be, quite easily. You can end up with 5 at the back. It can become 5-3-2, that's a pretty tough back line to break down. Capozzo and Herberg there, they can go deeper and go alongside the centre backs. And then in terms of the 3 midfielders, maybe one can be deeper. One of my favourite things about a 5-3-2 or 3-5-2, the 2 strikers can be exactly how you want them. They can play off themselves complementary. They can be quite advanced, or you can have one that sort of drops deeper, almost like a false 9. You know what I mean? Deep lying forward sort of thing. It's in and out of possession as well. There's a lot of differences. What would you say? Out of possession is the most important thing about this system.
Yeah, well, you're bang on there. You've identified some really good points, and each formation we're going to talk about in this section before we move on to the match analysis later is basically going to just look at the differences between these different shapes and different formations that some of these teams are playing. Because why is it such a growing trend? Why is Allsvenskan suddenly going through this sort of 3-4-3 mania, or 3-5-2 mania? What is this? Why is this trend becoming so popular? Now, you talked about sort of in possession as well, and some of the benefits, and also what you can do defensively. Some of the key factors when you're out of possession, Steve. Obviously, as you can see here on the screen, the centre backs can mark zonally. They can cover the central areas and also sort of half spaces. There's not as much pressure on them. They do have the support of each other. You've got, as you said there, the wing backs can tuck in and create a 5-man back line. So defensively, that's a very strong sort of back line to be able to defend. You've got Sliwan Cambo, who is quite defensive at times, and he's been really, really good this season so far. Arhin and Fritzen, they can drop deeper. When the ball is played out wide, of course, you've got the centre mid here who can defend, and then you've got to get against the wing back, so you've almost got an overload there, defensively. And even if they get through, they've still got the outside centre back to get through. So if you're coming at it from the wide areas, if you're that compact, it's very difficult to break that down. You can go on the outside as well, but again, you've got all the space. If the forwards drop back as well, then you can create a very, very compact formation. So that's some of the advantages. That defensive solidity. You've got the zonal coverage. You can play very narrow, so you don't need to sort of have too much width if you don't need to. And those are some of the keys of it out of possession. I mean, you, Steve, have got some theories in terms of in possession. What are the strengths of this formation, in your opinion?
What I like about this system is I think people, it's quite a disciplined compared to some other ones we're going to talk about. It's quite disciplined. You know where your width is coming from in this system, and it's going to be the wing backs. It's as simple as that. Okay, maybe one of the strikers can kind of stretch the game out wide, but in general, the three central midfielders tend to stay fairly central in this system. Your width is coming from the wing backs. If you've got some very good wing backs in your side, then this is a system that is definitely for you. So that's one of my favourite things. If it was me managing the side, I'd be getting some wing backs, good crossing. I'd get them not bombing forward necessarily, but going forward, getting crosses in. You've got two strikers on the field who can get on the end of it. You're probably going to get at least one midfield runner as well. Keep it quite simple. That's one of my favourite things about this system in possession. But, in terms of, we've talked about this craze about a lot of teams in Sweden using 3-4-3, 5-3-2, 3-5-2. Why do you think it's happened? Is there some other examples of really big clubs in Europe using the system?
Yeah, great question, Steve. And before we move away from Östersunds, I thought that it'd be good to wrap up this 5-3-2 conversation by looking at some of the other top teams in Europe around it. And of course, not one of them who is just about to win the league in Serie A, of course, is Inter Milan. They're probably the most famous 3-5-2 team, aren't they? Really, when you look at it, we just come back here and we just pull these again. We're not going to pull up an Inter Milan graphic on this, but if you just look at the kind of formation, you can get an idea of it. You've got Lukaku up front, Lautaro Martinez. You've got the 3-5-2 of Inter Milan. Conte is very well known, isn't he? He won the Premier League in England with a 3-5-2 at Chelsea. Really, 3-4-3 you could argue, but mainly it was a 3-5-2. Very good in counter-attacking situations, and that's one of the key things with this formation is counter-attacking. What you can do with this formation is, out of possession, we've mentioned, your two forwards can press. They can press the space. They can drop deeper, and they can sort of start as your first defensive point. These are the defensive shields. If teams can break that line of the press, then you've got the three centre midfielders, very, very compact, hard to break down. You've got wide areas covered. But also what you've got, Steve, is in possession, and especially in transition. When the ball breaks down and you're going from defending situations to attack, you've got the ability to transition. If you've got fast-paced, strong fullbacks, you can get them bombing up and down the pitch. Now, in the case of Östersunds, Inter Milan really probably one of the main blueprints, aren't they? Juventus played it back in the day when they had obviously Pogba, Pirlo, those kind of players. They had that kind of formation. Now let's go back to Allsvenskan. With Östersunds, they're quite a very defensive formation. Capozzo and Holberg are not really natural wing backs. They're not really that quick or kind of attack-minded. They are a lot more defensive-minded. And this is where Östersunds have had a lot of joy, because what they do is they break with the pace of Perry and Turgut. Now, they pretty much stay very compact defensively. The wing-backs do try and get up, but they tend to play passes into the forwards. You'll have seen the Örebro game in transition. They really flew forward, especially from midfield. But it was really the pace of Turgut and Perry getting in behind that 4-4-2 formation and scoring goals. And that's one example of it there. In possession, what it allows you to do is it allows you to create overloads defensively, but it also allows you to spring traps, and then it allows you to break out with huge pace going down the wings. And that brings us to a different formation, isn't it? Which is a little bit more of an attacking formation. Yeah. And that is, who is it, Steve?
Well, the 3-4-3. So we've done the 3-5-2 there. Tell us about, let's switch now to the 3-4-3 variation of this. Again, three centre-backs on the field. A line of four midfielders, which, they can be classed as sort of quite interchangeable, and then three guys in the final third, certainly one striker followed by two other players, so either out wide or inside. So 3-4-3, Jonathan. We're just going to switch now to this 3-4-3 screen that you're going to share with us, and there it comes up. This is an example of Degerfors, I do believe. 3-4-3. Take us through this system.
Yeah, 3-4-3, and we will talk on Degerfors a lot more detailed in part 3. But I'm just going to use them as the example here. So 3-4-3 system is, of course, as you can see, it's slightly different to the 3-5-2 because you've got 2 in midfield rather than 3. You've got wide forwards in a 3-man shape, so you've got a little bit more width. You've got the base of 3 centre backs, but you've got wing backs who really do need to get up and down the pitch a lot more regularly in terms of support, and they can also drop back quicker. You've got 2-man midfield, so you really rely on these 2 to pivot and sort of play passes into the wide areas, and also you can create overloads with that. You've got the 3 there as overloads because Edvardsen, for example, for Degerfors, or Abraham, and we see against the IFK they did this to very good effect. They can drop deeper and they can pressure the wide areas, and they can also come inside and pressure central spaces. This is something that Sirius do very well, isn't it, Steve? They create more of a 4-man block there, which we might come on to later. But you can be flexible with your wide forwards, but you do have a central striker as well, and obviously you don't have 2 up front, but you've got 2 out wide who can maybe potentially get in the box and create spaces. So some of the tactical theories of a 3-4-3, of course. Let's look at it. What are the tactical theories that you can look at? Well, number 1, it is a lot more. It is a very strong base, isn't it, Steve? It creates a good grounding for players. Every kind of area of the pitch, the zones, the half spaces are covered. You can see down here the half space. You can see down here the half space. You've got a lot of ground covered. You've got a lot of passing options here. Every player's got decent passing options. You can play in triangles, which is something that's, for example, Pep Guardiola does very well. Creates triangles for his team, as you can see here, passing triangles to get round other opponents. You've got full defensive coverage in zonal spaces. Of course, if you want to shift to a 5-4-1, you can do that very easily. These 2 can drop back. These 2 can drop back, and the next thing you've got a 5-4-1. So it's got the ability to be a lot more, maybe even arguably stronger than a 3-5-2 because you've got 2 up front in that system. This system, the wide forwards can naturally drop back, and you've got a 5-4-1, which is very, very hard to break down. You can create overloads, of course, in the final third when you're attacking, because what happens, Steve, when you attack in possession is if you've got wide forwards here, and if the wing backs are strong enough to get forward, then what you end up with, Steve, is overloads. And that's what football's all about, really, creating 2v1 situations, creating overloads. And what you can do here with the wide forwards, they can link with the wing backs. And of course that creates, you can have an overload. If you've got a 4-man midfield, if you've got a 4-man defence here defending, where does the left back go? Does he press the wing back, or does he press the wide forward? You can get in behind, you can create those overloads, and then you've got the central striker who can get in the box and get in the end of any crosses. So it's very, very hard for a team in a 4-4-2 to choose where to defend. So you've got to be very, very clever in that situation. But there are some weaknesses, aren't there, in a 3-4-3, Steve, as well. I mean, let's shift away from maybe Degerfors and move to a different team. But what are your feelings in terms of weaknesses of a 3-4-3?
Or 3 can leave you in a position. Just say you've lost the ball. You're going to be in a position like this where you've probably got 1 inside. Say the opposition are coming at you here. There's a massive pressure on these 2 centre midfielders. If you're playing against, say, a 4-3-3 or a system where there's a lot of central players, you can get overrun in this area. Yes, then you've got your back line of 3, but this is a problem whilst these wing backs or wide midfielders or whatever role you want to call them get back into gear, because they can often be caught out. So I think in this system, this is a very important part of the field, and it's a definite weakness if you get caught out. Before I forget, actually, I just want to talk about a strength of the system we're not even talked about yet. The ability to actually have 3 centre-backs on the field can massively help you from a set-piece situation, both in terms of defence and attack. So if you've got, if you're a corner sort of team, you've got a good delivery, you can pump these centre-backs up. That is a massive help, So yeah, there's I think there's a lot of strengths, a lot of weaknesses. I mean, this is I'm using Sirius actually as an example here. Sirius tend to have a slight variation on this system. It's almost sort of a box-like way. They're very narrow. These two players become genuine A-mids, and you can actually have a system where they almost go 5 at the back, sort of 5-2-2-1 almost with Sirius. So this is like an unusual variation of the system where you got 3 at the back. But I mean, let's talk about some of the teams that are using 3-4-3s, and I know Degerfors are an example. What about Norling's system at Norrköping there, because that's quite well known, isn't it?
Yeah, Rickard Norling is generally quite tactically fluid and flexible, and he's played in this sort of formation with AIK. It was quite a defensive formation. This Norrköping side looks as if it's going to try and be a little bit more progressive, Steve. So let's just quickly look at this formation from Norrköping in the opening games of the season. Now, the personnel changes at times, of course. It's not been the exact team for every single game, but this has pretty much been the 3-4-3 so far for Norling. Now you've got Aguadius, who kind of is a left-sided kind of centre-back or left-back, really. He's out here. You talked about you need strong centre midfielders. Now, I think that's one of the advantages of this system. Fransson and Bergman Johannesson are extremely good in centre midfield. I think they're two of the best, maybe in Allsvenskan, arguably, in central midfield spaces. Now, these positions are mixed up a little bit, but Skulason and Abdul Razak have come in at times. Jonathan Levy, Haksabanovic, and then obviously you've got Adik Benro. These positions have changed at times, and there has been other personnel, but these have been some of the main players in this team. So it allows you to, as I say, have strong midfielders who can get on the ball. They can break the lines of play. They can come back, receive the ball deep, and they can also play passes in these half spaces, play passes in behind team's defence, play passes through the middle, maybe through the centre backs, and of course you've got the central striker getting on the end of it. Haksabanovic is extremely talented going forward. Levi as well has a lot to offer in forward areas. So the flexibility of this 3-4-3, Steve, it allows you to be quite attacking whilst also having that defensive shape. If you look at some of the overloads it creates, and we talked about that a bit earlier, the centre mids generally retain some depth, but they can also support build-up play. They can drop deeper if needed. They can receive on a half turn, which is what Bergman, Hansen, and Fransson are good at doing. They're good at receiving on a half turn, breaking the lines. The wing backs can operate quite high. In this situation, Norrköping have players who can get quite high at the pitch. And we can look at other teams as well as an example of that, Degerfors, which we'll look at in part 2. So, it really does allow you to do that. And then in the attacking phase, this system allows you to sort of operate with, players in these sort of areas, number 9, wide areas. And it really does create many different overloads for teams. And I think that's one of the main strengths of it. It makes it hard for opponents to really deal with at times, doesn't it, Steve? And if we look at it, just to wrap up before we go into part 2, we've got so many different teams playing this formations now. May be more of a 3-5-2 we've seen, Steve. We've seen Kalmar playing a 3-4-3 with Henrik Rydström. IFK Göteborg more of a 3-5-2, which we'll talk about in the next part, in parts to come. Degerfors more of a 3-4-3. Norrköping kind of mixing a 3-4-3 at times as well. Varberg boys are kind of going for maybe a bit more of a defensive 5-3-2 or 3-5-2 hybrid. Even Halmstad, Steve, in the last game, they switched their formation against Norrköping to a back 5. You've mentioned Sirius there, who have that kind of box midfield with almost 2 number 10s or 4 central midfielders kind of in a box. And then Ostersund's in that sort of defensive 5-4-1/5-3-2 formation. So we are really seeing a massive trend in Allsvenskan at this moment in time, and I'm wondering if this is something that we're going to see maybe in other leagues, maybe in the Elite Syrian. Will it apply? Will it be widely adopted? Where's it come from? I'm not entirely sure. If you've got theories, if you're a fan of Allsvenskan, please let us know if you've got any theories as to why so many teams are starting to play this formation. Will it be here to stay? It's really quite fascinating, isn't it, Steve? And I think in part 2, which will come up shortly, we're going to briefly talk about the 3-4-3, 3-5-2 when they meet a more traditional formation, and maybe some of the weaknesses when playing against a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-3-1, aren't we, Steve?
Yeah, stay tuned for part 2, where we're just going to see, how you can take down these systems, because we're kind of bigging them up bigging them up a bit, aren't we? But they do have their problems as well. So yeah, we'll stay tuned for that.
Welcome to part 2 of this special episode of the Nordic Football Podcast as we delve deep into the tactical breakdown of Allsvenskan so far this season. We've had 3 rounds, enough time for us to get our teeth sunk into this season so far. And the big trend we've discovered, as we've mentioned in part 1, is the rise of 3-4-3 and 3-5-2 in Allsvenskan. So we are looking at tactical theories in this podcast. Now, we talked about the strengths of this 3-4-3. Or a 3-5-2. As we say, 56% of teams in Allsvenskan are playing it at this moment in time, the majority of the league. But there are also some, challenges, and one of the predominant, dominant really formations in European football over the past 10-15 years has been the 4-2-3-1 or the 4-4-2 or the 4-3-3, hasn't it, Steve? And this game that we've picked out now, which you're going to introduce, Steve, was a good example of when a 3-4-3 meets a 4-4-2 or a 4-man defensive formation, and sort of the challenges that it can face, and maybe why it's not so mainstream in other European leagues.
Yeah, this is IFK against Degerfors. IFK won the game 2-0, deserved victory, and the problem. I'm going to talk about the problem from a defensive point of view first, because we've got, I'm just showing now the average positions for the players in this system. So we've got 4-4-2 against a 3-4-3. As you can see, IFK there is pretty standard actually for a 4-4-2. You could say certainly the wingers are quite high. In the case of Tupa, for example, his average position was the highest out of anyone in the team. But in terms of the matches, in the middle of the park, you've got Larson and Hussein, who quite simply in this game were better than what Degerfors midfielders were about. They just were better. And if they needed to, IK could actually bring Stefanelli back into sort of more attacking midfield, top side of midfield anyway, make it sort of a centre sort of midfield duo really. I'm just going to show you the formation now of IK, and right, okay, it's the IK formation. So standard 4-4-2, but sometimes Stefanelli was sort of drifting here, almost like a shadow striker, but coming back in. So basically, it was an overloading midfield. Remember, Degerfors are using a 3-4-3. They don't have a D mid as such. They just basically playing with 2 centre midfielders. So they had a big problem with the overloading midfield. And then they've got Radulovic, who, to be fair, he had a quiet game, but he was kind of keeping a lot of their centre backs occupied with his movements and his sort of physique. And then you've got the wide players, Tupa and Bahoui, who just ran riot at times against a 3-man defence. You basically got the 3 centre backs that are occupied with these guys. You've got 2 centre midfielders who are completely dominant against their counterparts, and then you've got these wide guys who, and then with ably supported by the fullbacks, I might add, and you end up with a position where you just get an overload sometimes going forward. So like if a left hand side cross is coming in, you've got your 2 strikers there, you've got your right winger in there for a finish, and you've even got your fullback sort of support upfield. So what I'm actually going to do now, I'm going to go into the match itself for some clips. We're starting here in the very first minute, 1 minute and 5 seconds on the board, and Degerfors are just attempting to sort of clear the ball, pass the ball away from this position. Now, one of the problems with using a 3-4-3 system for me, I'm going to talk about this later as well when we do IFK against Degerfors, is I think you've got to have better players for this system, because it can leave you exposed with the wrong sort of thing. I've watched Leeds United before play 3-4-3, and I've seen us give the ball away in this position too often, and it does leave you very exposed. And Degerfors, what they're trying to do here, remember Degerfors' style in this game, they had 54% of the ball, so they have been looking to pass. They're not just trying to hoof it long, sort of thing, which might be a mistake, as we're going to see in this clip now. The best, what this defender should be doing here now, he should be trying to get rid of the ball, get it downfield, because they're in a position, they're outnumbered, they're swarmed. If he gives the ball away in a dangerous position here, they're in trouble, and we're going to see what happens now. It's kind of a nothing clearance. It's actually a pass, and they're in huge trouble, because with the 3-4-3 system, you've got basically not enough cover out wide. You've just got the 3 centre backs. The 2 midfielders are almost bypassed already. It's caught them out, and AEK probably should score from this move. They don't. They get away with it. The goalkeeper straight at the goalkeeper. But that's a problem. What I'd call centrally in this 3-4-3 formation. You can have problems if you've not got the right sort of players on the ball, if you haven't got the right sort of midfielders to retrieve the ball either. This now is a problem that they had throughout the game. This is when you have problems against a flat back 4 or a system that's got good wide players facing a 3-4-3, and ultimately they don't heed the warning from this, because they can see 2 goals like this in a minute. Now, this is a fairly, I'm not saying it's a tame position. It's quite a normal situation that an offensive team will find itself in. They've got someone looking across the ball in. You've got some runners coming in here, and a lot of the time, I think the defending team would back itself to get this one away and not concede a goal or concede a big chance from it. Now, in fairness, at this point in time, Degerfors are not that badly positioned. However, what I'm focused on here, this is the right sort of wing back or right midfielder. You've got your 3 centre backs in a line here. Then there you've got the left wing back, and for me, he's actually not in a bad position there, but he's only just got back into his spot. So, and then unfortunately the midfielders are still tracking back. They're not in a great position against good quality opposition. Like AEK have got some good players here off the ball. You might find yourself in trouble. Effectively you end up with like a 2 versus 3 in this position, and then a 1 versus 1 at the back post. Now that for me creates danger, because none of these midfielders are chipping in. There's no defensive midfielder in this system. The cross comes in, and basically the defenders lose this man here, and he probably should score. They're lucky to get away with that, AEK. That's a combination of the system, but also sort of matching up to the opposition is not very good. This is a clip. This is one of the few chances that Degerfors actually had in this game. This is offensively, and they end up with a chance and a save from this. But I'm actually going to consider it a negative of the system if the players aren't in the right roles. Now, they actually get a decent ball through here. Now, that is the number 9. That is the striker, Bertelsen. Now, he is playing, I don't know why he's playing so deep in this particular system. There is a lot of pressure, by the way, on the lone striker in this 3-4-3 system. He's got to be really good in all aspects, but quite why he came so deep here, I'm not sure. Again, it might be because there's a lack of central options. They don't have like a number 10 in this system. They don't even have necessarily a midfielder that would necessarily drive into the box. So he's forced into this position because of the lack of other options. This is actually a very nice pass. It's played out wide, but at this point in time, the 3-4-3 is limited. The strikers had to drop too deep. We've got now, this is what can happen with 3-4-3. You get the right wing back and the right-sided attacker. For me, they can just become too in each other's way, if you know what I mean. I feel like this happens too often, and some might consider it a positive that you get like an overload of players, but it's like they're almost in each other's faces too much. They're at each other's throats, perhaps. When it doesn't give you enough of an option. There's not enough options central here. For me, I think this is Edvarsson. He should have been looking at a run into this area here, sort of certainly on the back of his number 4, looking to make that run, because they've got nothing here to worry about. This midfielder, he's not driving in to the box enough at this point in time, and the striker's far too deep. Now, actually, this left wing back does pretty well to get a shot away, as we see, but he has to shoot here, really, because Edvarsson's done his absolute best to try and get in the box. He's too late. He can't pull that across now. because it's just not going to reach him. There's just not enough other options available to this left wing back. If there was another body in the middle, it'd be different. But I feel like Edvarson's almost just too late getting into this position. The striker's gone walkabout. None of the central midfielders are making the run. So, he does well here to get the shot away and the save. But for me, that's a limitation of the 3-4-3 offensively. Sometimes you can just get players in the wrong positions, and there's too much of a gap. They're too far apart with certain other areas. Now, this is another chance that they give away on this next highlight. This is similar to the first highlight. Look, when you give the ball away in this danger spot here, before the halfway line, before the centre circle, you are going to be exposed in a 3-4-3, because more likely than not, you're going to have like a wing back advanced up here. You might even have another wing back the other side advanced. The two midfielders are often constantly looking behind their shoulders a bit when they give the ball away. It's sloppy, don't get me wrong, it's a sloppy giveaway. If you're trying to play the wrong type of football with the wrong type of players, you're in trouble. Again, they get away with it here because the header goes straight at the goalkeeper. There's no way the defect. That's poor marking as well, by the way. But the warning signs are there for Degerfors in this game, and then we go to the goal, and the goal is let me just get up to the goal now. It's this is the situation for the goal as we just go on. That was a penalty appeal that Degerfors had in this game. They did have a little bit of success on the left hand side. This is the goal. This is remarkably similar to the second clip I gave you, except this time they're not as well positioned defensively. It's very similar. They've got these three defenders, these three centre backs against these two attackers, and then IFK actually got up a runner here from midfielders, got into a bit of a nifty position, and on the right hand side, the left wing back from the 3-4-3 system of Degerfors, he's out of position. He can't get back in time. It's not a left back. It's not even sort of a left wing back. He's too high up to get back. And the thing is, they've had chance to get back in here. It's not like they've just suddenly given the ball away. And you can get into a position where they're just out. You're relying on one-on-one matchups effectively. In this position here, it's 3 versus 3 in theory, and then 4 versus 4 if you consider the back post. But he's already lost his man, so it's not even a matchup. And does he get back in time? No, he's still just jogging here. He should be busting the gut to get back. But even so, the cross comes in, and what happens with the Tupa, the right winger, has already got free. He's been free for a while, and he manages to get the finish into the back of the net. Job done for IFK. And that's the system. I showed you before that front bank of 4 attackers supported by by fullbacks in the 4-4-2 system, and that caught Degerfors out. And the second goal for them was another problem as we just move now towards that second goal. This is the second goal now. Now it's they're a little bit unlucky here. There's a tackle, but already there's a problem. Now bear in mind they are 1-0 down, so they might have been chasing the game. We'll let them off perhaps a little bit, but it's only the 64th minute. It's not like they should be going gung-ho for leather or anything like that. But we've got this situation in the middle. The defence is all out of shape. This time it's the right wing back who's nowhere to be seen at all, and you've got so much space with these two already. The defence is just all over the gaff. It should have had time to get back in. Even now, they've got problems. Why they're in this spot, I don't know. This might be like some personal, individual mistakes perhaps here in decision making. But again, there's always going to be this massive gap at the back post. You know, I talked about that front 4 of attackers that get in there. There you go. You've got the right winger. You've got your 2 strikers here, and then you've got your left winger in that position. It's always going to be that bank of 4 are going to have trouble. They're going to give trouble to a back 3, and then they're going to give trouble to a back 3, a wing back trying to block here, and then another wing back is never going to be in sight. And this is where the 3-4-3 has big problems. Easy goal for Bahoui there at the back post, and that really for me sums up a lot of the problems that you can have in this system. And hopefully be a replay here just to put it into perspective. When you are defending at 4-4-2, especially, or 4-3-3, you are going to have this front bank of attackers who are going to give you trouble, and it's because the wing backs are higher in the 3-4-3, and you don't have the midfield cover depth either. So there's some examples from this match, some clips where the 3-4-3 does have problems defending against a 4-4-2 system. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go back to the AIK formation and discuss how Degerfors had problems sort of breaking it down, more problems against the defensive aspect of a 4-4-2. It can be quite hard to impregnate. That sounds a bit rude actually, doesn't it? But
I mean, you've got an overload there in terms of the positionally. You've got a 4 against a 3.
See, if Degerfors are trying to break this down now, say Degerfors are in possession, they don't really have a natural sort of advantage in this part of the field, because the back 4 of IFK is really solid. They can basically get 2 banks of 4, and then Stefanelli actually, to be fair, got chipped in. He's sort of tracking back sometimes in this area, just hustling a bit, and from an offensive point of view, it suddenly becomes quite hard to break down unless you've got the type of player. If you've got quality individual players, you can break down any system. So I think that is a plus point of 3-4-3. But against most sort of mere mortal teams and systems, I actually think 4-4-2 or 4-3-3 is quite a good matchup for 3-4-3 myself. If I was trying to counteract it, I would be looking. I would probably be looking more 4-3-3ish, to be honest, like this, if it was me. But a 4-4-2 is equally effective. I just feel like if you can really swarm that middle of the park, you've got a solid back 4, and take it from there really. But I feel like this is a good system to use against 3-4-3. However, there's examples, we're going to look now in part 3, where the 3-4-3 can actually be employed very well. But in this particular instance against IAK, it didn't work. You can see why IAK got the advantages in the system, and it just didn't quite come off for Degerfors.
Yeah, you've got different overloads in a 4-4-2 system, and the 2 banks of 4 probably do help it, don't they? And of course, when you play a 4-2-3-1 as well, as we saw, I mean, Hacken found trouble playing that 4-2-3-1 against Sirius's sort of 3-4-2-1. So it does raise all kinds of question marks, doesn't it? And teams in Allsvenskan, some of the teams are struggling, but then you've got, of course, top of the table is currently Djurgården, who are not playing a 3-4-3 or 3-5-2. So it really does raise a lot of question marks. I think in part 3, what we'll do, we're going to focus on the game of the week. That was IFK Göteborg against Degerfors, a massive game, and it was a bit of a shock defeat really for IFK against the newly promoted Degerfors. And this was a classic example of a 3-5-2 against a 3-4-3. And where you've seen here, Steve has pointed out some weaknesses of that formation. What we'll look at is when these two formations clash, because if 9 teams are playing it in Allsvenskan, we're going to face a lot more of these kind of clashes in the weeks to come, and it could be the determining factor for this early part of the season, really, who can create better systems of the 3-4-3 or the 3-5-2. So in part 3, we will switch from looking at the 3-5-2 against a 4-man defence, and we'll switch to looking at when the 2 teams collide.
So there was a very interesting case of a clash of these sort of formations recently. It was IFK Gothenburg against Degerfors. It ended in a 3-2 victory for Degerfors, their first victory of the season. And basically, the way we're depicting this is we've got a 3-5-2 of IFK against the 3-4-3 of Degerfors. It changes when you're in and out of possession, Jonathan. Let's start off with the IFK system, and you've got it there right now. We can see it on screen. Take us through how IFK worked in this game.
Yeah, so welcome to part 3, and this is the crux of the debate really. Is it better to play as a 3-5-2, or is it better to play a 3-4-3? We've seen every team in Allsvenskan. We've seen 56% of Allsvenskan playing in these new formations. Some of them mixing it up with a 3-4-3. Some are mixing it up with a 5-3-2. This game really is a embodiment. It captures what we're talking about here and the dilemmas of playing against each other. So really, this was a great example, this match, because it showed us two teams playing sort of slightly different formations, and it shows us the strengths and the weaknesses of both formations. So this was a really great case study on Monday night. Big game, IFK at home to Degerfors. So as you can see here, Steve, we've got the, IFK in a kind of a 3-5-2. You could call it a 5-3-2 if you want. You've got your wing backs here, Aish and Jallo. You've got your back three, Eriksson, Bjardsmere and Tolinson, keeper obviously. And then you've got Erling Marcus centre midfield, you've got Yusuf, Hamzik, and then you've got Sigthorsson and Sana up front. Now, the key to this, obviously, we talked about it in part one, the key to a sort of a good 3-5-2, the strengths are, it's quite solid structurally. You've got good passing angles here. For example, Jallo, he's got triangles he can pass to. Eriksson can pass it out wide. He can pass it in field. He's got support. Mark can drop to receive possession. Hamzik can drop if he needs to. Yusuf can drop if he needs to. So you've got good support. Then when you're playing through the lines, Hamzik's got a lot of space here. He can drift. Yusuf can drift. These two forwards can drop deeper. Sana, who's not really an out-and-out striker, he's someone who can drop deep into number 10 positions, maybe go out wide if he needs. So structurally, it's quite good. You've got the extra man in midfield, Steve. So if you compare this to a 3-4-3, which I will do in a second, you will see that, in a 3-4-3 formation, you've got two-man midfield, whereas IFK outnumber Degerfors with a three-man midfield, which that allows a bit more space. And you've also got an extra man in attack, because you can have two out-and-out strikers here in Sana and Sigthorsson, or you can have, you've got two bodies up there rather than one in a 3-4-3. Of course, in a 3-4-3, you've got wide players, but they're a little bit further disconnected than sort of these two up front. And you've also got that sort of solid structure to build through central areas. If you look at it really, if you look at the spine of this team, Steve, you've got a 3 and a 3 and a 2, which is quite different to a 3-4-3. So you've got that kind of solid spine, and you've also got extra support for the centre backs, because when the wing backs are in defensive situations, they can pull in and they can form that 5-3-2 formation. So that was how IFK set up. Now, let's look at Degerfors by contrast. Now, with Degerfors, they've got a 3-4-3 formation. And we've talked about this in part one, Steve. We talked about the differences in terms of the structure. Now, the structure in this kind of this setup is, obviously we talked about the strengths of it. It is, again, structurally quite good. You've got good passing angles. Crouch as the two kind of wide players, wing backs, and Ayaz. You've got three-man defence. So they've got the same similar passing lanes. You've got two in midfield, Gravius and Carlin. And then you've obviously got the wide forwards and the striker. So you don't have the same structural dominance in the spine, because you've got a 3 and a 2 and a kind of a 1, unless, these two wide forwards tuck in. So if they don't tuck in and they play more wide, then you've got a lone striker. So you don't have that two strikers. You've got a lone striker. So you need a really strong, powerful striker who can hold the ball up, someone who can, do the job on his own if need be. You've got one less man in midfield. And this is going to be a key talking point as we discuss this game. So you've got Gravius and Carlin against Yusuf, Erling Mark and Hamzik. And then obviously you've got the three in the back as well. But so you've got you've got the good defensive support for the centre-backs, but you do lack, you can be overloaded in that midfield situation. And also, you've got no number 10 here, whereas as a 5-3-2 with IFK, Sana, as I mentioned earlier, he can drop deeper. With this situation, you've got two sets of wide players, because you've got Krauj and Ayaz as the wing backs, but you've also got wide forwards. So really, Steve, you either need one of these two wide forwards as someone who can invert and maybe play more centrally, but then you've got obviously a gap and an overload, or you're going to need a very, very strong, maybe two number 10s where you play a bit more narrow. So that's maybe an alternative, but then again, it's still structurally a little bit different, isn't it? So you do need very good midfielders as well, because you've got one less midfielder. You need two midfielders who can really run and do well, or alternatively, you need to have one of these two, Edvards and Abraham, maybe as more of a midfield minded to drop deep. So as you can see, it's probably is a little bit less balanced than the 3-5-2, but it does offer opportunities in when you're going forward, because when you're playing that 3-5-2 formation, there's a lot of space here in these wide areas. And if you look back to the IFK formation, they have a very, very sort of central forwards compared to Degerfors. So there's a little bit more tactical flexibility here, because you're not always relying on these wide players here, the wing backs, to do all your width. You've actually got men who can play wide as natural wide players, which allows these to drop deeper if needs be. So this played out in the game, and if we look at it, and I'm just going to run through a few little tidbits. We do have clips to demonstrate.
Just before that, I'm actually going to show the average positions, because all while formations go down on paper, but this is taken from Wyscout. This is now what you're going to see on screen is the average positions of the players on the field. I don't know, I think you can hopefully have access to this now, Jonathan, as well, but what really struck me here was how narrow IFK actually were. I mean, incredibly, their highest positioned player upfield was the number 8, Aish, the right wing back. He effectively played as a right winger, but apart from him, and occasionally the number 2 as well, I think he's one of the centre backs, this was incredibly narrow from IFK. It's like all the midfielders seem on top of each other. Everyone is so congested centrally. Now, whether this actually became a problem for them during the game, I think perhaps it's something we can consider. Whereas we look at Degerfors, and it was certainly the 3-4-3 played more true to how it comes across on paper. They kind of, no one was really where you wouldn't expect them to be. The other thing to consider, by the way, is that the IFK defensive line was much higher than Degerfors. Degerfors were happy to drop deep. A lot of this was perhaps due to the second half they were kind of protecting a lead, so naturally you do drop deep. But it intrigued me that IFK ended up so narrow. Do you think that was by design or just the way the match went?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's partly by design. I think partly by how the match went, and I think it's partly the kind of weaknesses of a 3-5-2, and that's really the key here, because you don't have as many options in wide areas, and that is one of the key weaknesses of this formation. You rely fully on your wing backs for your play. Now they did tend to get down the wings at times, but as you mentioned, it was mainly through players like even Tolinson, who is a centre back, and Ice. And one of the biggest problems I felt, Steve, in this game really is they were very imbalanced.
Could we switch back to the IFK formation, just on the one that you've got there?
Yes, I'm going to do that. They're very unbalanced.
Yeah, we're just going to go back there. Yeah, it's interested me that the number 2, Tolinson, actually, in terms of the average position, he kind of was more like right midfield at times. And yet the guys on the left, Jallo, for example, looked more like an inverted wing back the way his positioning was. It was very intriguing to me.
Yeah,
in that regard.
Let's look at this. Let's break down the game itself and really some of the keys to the match. And if we take your case there, what you're saying about the narrowness, partly it was because they've got the 3 main midfielders here, and they do have that overload in that central midfield area. You've got Carlos and Gravian for Degerfors, and you've got Hamzik, Erling, Mark, Yusuf. So you've got a 3v2. One of the reasons you've got is that Sana tended to drop deeper here in these positions. He doesn't play that far wide. Sigthorsson is more of an out-and-out striker, so he is your sort of 9x9. He is your target man. You've got the wide players here. Now, really, for me, this is one of the key weaknesses, probably 2 key weaknesses, I'd say, of IFK in this current system, Steve. Number 1, Jallo down this left-hand side. And we see many, many clips that we can show you. Jallo is not a natural left wing-back. He's right-footed for number 1. There was even an example of where he tried to put in a cross with a Rabona flick rather than go on his left foot. So that just shows you kind of the square pegs in the round holes that was a bit of a theme of this game. Then you've got Eriksson. Now Eriksson, Steve, has played most of his career in midfield. He's not a natural centre-back by any means. And they use Eriksson to build the play. So really, he comes forward and he did play some nice passes down the wing, but he's not a natural left-sided centre-back by any means. He's learning the position. I'd probably say he's tertiary or secondary position there. Certainly not comfortable as an out-and-out defender. So he sometimes stepped into these sort of areas and maybe made it more of a midfield. So that again provides that narrowness. Then you have Bjartmir Tolinson. And again, Steve, on the other side, in terms of square pegs, round holes, Hossam Aish. Now he really is a winger.
And that's where he ended up in his average position. And the crazy thing is, Jallow, for example, actually his average position is inside Eriksson. So Eriksson was actually more wide.
Well, exactly, and this is the thing, and that's the key to this game. That's where things have kind of gone wrong for IFK. They don't have wing backs who, at this moment in time, are natural wing backs for the positions. So there's a lot of square pegs and round holes. You've got Aish, natural winger, Eriksson, more of a midfielder, Jallow, more of probably a right-sided player. He can play either side, but really, as a right-footed player, it's not a natural position for him. You've got Hamzik as well, coming deeper. And you've got Sana looking to go wide here. So a lot of imbalance in terms of where players want to actually be playing. Now, if we look at it from IFK's point of view, it's a very unbalanced, as I say, formation. So the other side of it, Steve, is the lack of pressing, the lack of consistent pressing in forward areas from the two in attack, Sana and Sigthorsson. Now, there's a great example of this in the game in the 9th minute. This is when one of the three centre-backs, I'm just going to switch the screen again quickly. You probably have seen this, Steve, in the 9th minute. Olsen came forward and he has so much space and time. He's not pressed whatsoever. He gets to about here and he pings a 30-yard shot onto the crossbar. Absolutely rasping shot in the 9th minute.
Yeah, incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah, no pressure at all from Sana. And if we actually go to the average position here and we look at it, you'll see... Let's look at this clip.
I mean, Olsen's average position is pretty much where you would expect him to be overall, which is good, I think, for Degerfors, and it's same with quite a few of their players. They're kind of where you expect them to be.
100%.
It was more like IFK kind of lost their discipline.
Look at this clip, Steve. This is the clip. You've got Sana here. You've got Sigthorsson there, not pressing whatsoever. This is a centre-back in Degerfors' 3-4-3 system. He's come all the way. The back three, the midfield three are backing off. You've got Yusuf here, you've got Erling there, you've got Hamzik there, you've got the five at the back, and as I say, he comes forward here, and he literally has no. Sana here should be pressing him as a minimal. Yusuf potentially as well. Doesn't do it. They don't do it. And he clashes across the
I don't like how there's a lack of pressing. At the same time, though, I'm going to tell him shoot all day from there. I mean, that's a 1 in a million almost, isn't it? Scoring from there. But I suppose you can get deflections and things, can't you, as well? But
it's a very good point. It's a very good point, Steve. But the why I draw your attention to it is because it was a constant theme of this game. Now, Olsen, fine, that's okay. You don't mind if he's coming forward like that. But what we had is you've got an overload here, but we had the midfield three of IFK really not pressing well enough, and the forwards as well not pressing well enough. So this led to a situation where what we've got is when in a 3-4-3. So if you can see the screen here, just a picture. You've got three defenders of Degerfors here. It's hard to switch between the two formations, but you've got the three here, you've got the four here, and you've got the three here. Now, those are your defenders, those are your midfielders, these are your forwards. When the wide players, Ayaz and Kralj for Degerfors, have the ball, Hamzik needs to press here in the wide areas. Yusuf, when the ball's on the other side, needs to press in these wide areas. If they don't press in those areas, then there's big trouble because they have two wide players in these situations that can come and cause problems. They've got not only the forwards, in that 3-4-3 formation. So in this case, obviously, it's you've got the forwards who had some luck. Bertilsson, of course, up front are Abraham and Edvardsson, on as a three. But you've also got Ayaz out wide, and you've also got Crouch. So if these midfielders don't press or come back and help, then they're in big trouble. And this is something that didn't happen enough. Now, it's a bit surprising because, Hamzik, you can maybe understand, he's a little bit out of shape. He's not in the greatest of fitness. But Yusuf is a very fit, energetic midfielder, and he didn't tend to do it enough in this game. And I wonder if it's maybe just because they're learning the positions and not quite sure of it. Erling Mark was the holding midfielder. But I wonder if that's something that they're not quite sure of, because then you've got Aish. He's not a natural defender. So when Yusuf didn't, track his man back, there was an overload of 2 against 1 on Aish, and there's an overload on Jallo as well. And obviously Eriksson, as I said, is not a natural defender. So Hamzik, Yusuf, Sana, and Sigthorsson's lack of pressing really does not help in this formation, and that is what was one of the key themes to this game. The first goal comes in that situation because they're not pressing, and they allow the space and the time for a goal. Obviously,
do you have the first goal clip that we can have a look at here?
Yes. Let's go to it now.
Because what I noticed about this first goal, it shouldn't have been conceded. Forget the goalkeeper for a minute. We talked about this problem that IFK have got on the left-hand side with Jallo cutting inside, Eriksson seemingly the most wide defender. That was an area which Degerfors, for me, they took advantage of that sometimes, and they were not positionally ready for the first goal. They should have stopped the shot getting in, basically, or him progressing where he did. I thought that was a big problem for this first goal. Yes, he should have saved it. We know that, and there was the pigeon incident as well. But I think it ended up being a weak part of IFK, both defensively and offensively, on that left-hand side of the field for them.
Well, let's look at it. I mean, this is the clip, and what happens here is that when you don't have that pressing from Sana, Sigthorsson, when it comes to transitions, and a key element of these formations, which we talked about in part 1, is transitions.
I can't see the clip yet.
Yeah, let's talk about it, because in these clips, defensive transitions are key.
Right.
So
okay. Right, here we go then for this goal.
So this is for the goal, and as we mentioned in part 1, defensive transitions are a key element to 3-5-2s, 3-4-3s, and IFK's lack of pressing was something that happened a lot in transitions. As I mentioned, Sana ball watching. So in this situation here, IFK, their outer midfielders, Yusuf and Hamzik, they're not active enough when it comes to pressing, and it leads to an overload in the situation. Their wing backs are too high, the midfielders are too far forward, and Degerfors' first goal comes from this defensive to attacking transition with IFK exposed. Let's take a look. See, you've got Hamzik and Yusuf here. Simple run and they're out of the game. You've got Ayaz here out wide.
He's all alone, isn't he? Like, there's no one.
There's no one here at all.
That's the problem.
You've got Jallo here, Hamzik here. There's no pressing on the outer player on that 3-4-3. This is the wide forward, number 10, Abraham. This is Bertilsson. So they've allowed them to break through in the transition. You've got your 3 midfielders here in that 5-3-2. They are outnumbering them. This is an overload that they have, but they're not taking advantage of it because they're not pressing in the right areas.
Yeah.
The 2 wide players are in acres of space each. The 3 are not engaging; they're backing off, obviously. And then the position here is kind of no man's land, to be honest. The play builds up. Now, where's Hamzik, Steve? Supposed to be on this side here, pressing potentially. Jallo hasn't spotted his man at all. Way too inside. Ayaz has had a free run on the pitch. No one spotted him. You've got 8 players here, Steve. You've got 8 IFK players here. And not one of them is picking up the man on the outside. The ball is switched. Again, no central pressing. As I mentioned here, Sana kind of slow to get back. The three in midfield are not doing their job in terms of pressing and closing down those spaces. Again, no real pressing.
That is the first time IFK are actually in a 5-3-2 there.
Exactly.
They finally got back into position.
This is something that happened way too often. So when we come to the goal, it comes from a transition, which I'll show you now.
Yeah.
The ball breaks any second now. So we've got IFK trying to build possession. Ball breaks.
It was a good tackle in the first place, to be fair.
It's a good tackle, but now look.
And that's Edvardsen, I think.
Yeah.
Edvardsen had a very good game here, by the way. But look at this, yeah.
Hamzik, Jallo, Yusuf, Sana, Erlingmark. All three midfielders were taken out with one pass. Jallo, the wing back, okay, that's his job in this 5-3-2. You've got to, the wing backs have to get up forward.
Yeah, I'm not actually blaming Jallo as much here, but then he doesn't get back properly at all, though. He never once gets back, so he's either, not quite right for the role. He was outpaced ultimately, wasn't he?
So there you go, and this was something that happened, time after time, really. And ultimately, this is one of the issues with playing the 5-3-2 in defensive transitions. You're so heavily reliant on your wing backs to go forward that when you need them defensively, you can struggle.
Yeah. So.
And that is really what was the story of this game.
Yeah, it certainly was the story of this game, and. Do you think it's a case of sort of Degerfors are more used to their system? They know how to play. They're used to the 3-4-3, whereas IFK is kind of just learning the ropes a bit more. I mean, I'm just going to go to another slide here, and this is a statistical look at Degerfors in the first 3 games, and I actually think Degerfors learned their lesson in this match. They actually play against IFK, and we've talked about this before. Their possession in the game was a lot more than you would expect in that game. 55% possession actually against IFK. And against Kalmar, it was about 50-50. They were willing to drop down 37% of the ball against IFK. It's as if they kind of just knew how to play against them. They were counter-attacking well, caused problems like that. And it was like AFK were just like rookies, and they got really panicked in this situation. It was just a prime example of how not to sort of... Because IFK, if you go 11 versus 11, man to man, they are the better players. There's no doubt about that. But they didn't make the most of it, did they?
Well, here's my feelings, and this is where we get to the crux of the matter in terms of what do you prefer, what formation do you prefer. Listeners as well, do let us know what formation you prefer. I mean, Degerfors, when we break it down, out of possession, they drop into a 5-2-3. This is what they did in the game. Gravius and Carlin were kind of central midfielders. Kraj and Ayaz dropped. You've got your 3 at the back. They were quite disciplined. Abraham, Bertelsen and Edvardsen are more forward. But really, they're in a structured 5-2-3. And their structure was much better out of possession than IFK's generally, particularly for the first sort of 60 minutes or so. And that was the key to the game. IFK didn't take advantage of their domination in the midfield spaces. So really, that's a team thing. That's a team thing. Because tactically, they should have dominated. Degerfors' front 3 were a lot more proactive, I think, in their pressing. They often pressured IFK's back 3 and their wing backs very well. They squeezed the space. They pressured mistakes. They didn't allow them to play through midfield. Abraham and Edvardsen got into spaces. Gravius, I thought, was a key man. And Gravius in this game, he was the pivot. He was the one who dropped deep, received the play, and broke the lines of IFK's pressing. Well, if you can call it pressing, because their pressing wasn't great. But he was the man who would drop deep and create. He would start play. Crowd would get up. Ayaz would get up. Gravius would sort of drop deeper, play passes out wide, play passes to Carlin, play passes to Ayaz, or to the forwards. And so I think really with Degerfors, they're just a little bit better at it at this moment in time. I think they're a little bit more advanced. But I'm not entirely sure, Stephen, as we've seen in other games that they've not won. I'm not entirely sure that 3-4-3 is better than the 3-5-2. I mean, from my point of view, you need a very, very specific skill set to play a 3-4-3. And I think as the season goes on, let's see where things go for these players, because Abraham and Edvardsen, you need to be very, very good, in my opinion, to carry off a 3-4-3 for a consistent period of time through a season. You need very, very good tactical understanding from your wide forwards, and also your fullbacks, I suppose, as well. Also your wing backs. They need to have extremely good tactical understanding. So far, Ayaz and Crouch have been given quite a lot of space in certain games. Will they always get that space? I'm not too sure. I think other better teams will close them down. So I do worry about them going forward in terms of how long can they sustain that. But I do think this is a system that you need a lot of coaching and a lot of tactical discipline to get right. And Degerfors have been trying this system for quite a while now. You can't just pull the system off with one or two training sessions. You need to really, really work on it. By contrast, let's just go back to the EF core tactics before we wrap this up. So by contrast, a 5-3-2, Steve, or 3-5-2, whatever you want to call it, it's a lot easier to set up.
I agree. I do agree.
You don't need as much training. And this is where Ostersons, we talked about Ostersons in part one, this is why I think Ostersons are going for this formation and having a lot of success with it. You don't need a great squad, if you know what I mean. The squad is a lot weaker. Ostersons' squad is quite weak, but in a 3-5-2, you can kind of get away with it because you're packing five defenders pretty much. In transition, fine, if you want to get forward, they can be your offensive weapons, but you don't need to. If you don't have the ability, if they don't have the ability, they can stay further back, and you can just rely on, the five up front and just see what can be done. Basically, it's easier to coach. I think it's an easier system to set up. It's more defensively reliable, in my opinion, than the 3-4-3, because you've got that extra man in midfield, and you've got an extra forward. Of course, there's less width, and there's more reliance on, good wing backs. You need to be effective and a really, really good team. You need really, really good wing backs to play the system effectively. If you want to be offensively good and really challenge at the top end, you need really good wing backs. Because if you don't, as we've seen with EF Core, your system's going to break down.
I would say I agree. I think in a 5-3-2, the two most important positions are the wing backs. In a 3-4-3, for me, I actually believe in a 3-4-3. I've watched a lot of my own side, Leeds United, play 3-4-3 a lot. The two central midfielders for me are very important. You have got to have quality in that area. Luckily for us, we do have Leeds, say Calvin Phillips. When he's not available, it's like night and day. You can notice a massive difference because there's a massive pressure load on them two central midfielders in the 3-4-3. If they're not very good, forget it, because you'll get overrun against good quality. So I think the 5-3-2 is overall a much better system. It can suit most squads. There's more stability. 3-4-3 with the right players can be unbelievable. However, there's a lot more of a risky side to it. That is how I would sum it up personally.
If you have very, very, very good players in your 3-4-3 shape, and you have a lot of time to coach, and you've got a very good tactical understanding, as you've just mentioned there with Leeds, if you've got those players in those midfield areas that can do the job, you can probably get away with it. If you can't, then I think a 5-3-2 is better, and I think that's why you see it used more often. You don't see as many 3-4-3s in Allsvenskan at this moment in time. I think most teams have gone with a 3-5-2 when they've changed the system. Obviously, we mentioned Norrköping a little bit as well. We talked about them. Don't forget as well, with a 3-5-2, you've got two forwards. Now you can play as a 10 as well. You can make it a 5-4-1. It's a little bit more tactically versatile if you need to, or you can play two out and out strikers. Depends how you want to play it. In the 3-4-3, it's a lot more technically specific. You need players who can play particular, roles, and they have to be very, very good. And I think that's probably where we may see Degerfors come unstuck as the season goes along, because can they really execute that for a long period of time with those midfielders? Will they get the time? We mentioned against AIK, we mentioned the weaknesses of that. Can they get that long period of time to gel? I'm not entirely sure. So, what's your favourite formation, Stephen, to wrap it up?
For me personally, it's out of these two, 5-3-2 is definitely the way forward. If I was to go about it myself, I think it gives a lot more balance. For me, the 3-4-3, it can get confusing if the players don't know what the roles are. I have a problem with 3-4-3 being that the two wide players, the what you want to call it, sort of the wing backs, can get mixed up with potentially wingers if they're not, and you get too much of a cluster in that area of the field. And like I said, you can get overpowered in the middle of the park if you don't have. It's all right if you've got someone like Patrick Vieira in there, you know. But if you've got two sort of mere mortals in the centre of midfield, it's a massive ask on them. So I feel like if you have, again, right sort of players, 3-4-3 can work incredibly well. But overall, I would be looking, and I do like 5-3-2 or 3-5-2 is one of my favourite formations in football. So that's what I would go with. Definitely that. What about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it depends how you execute it. You can play a 3-4-3 diamond. I think Johan Cruyff has played that in the past and others, but you've got to be extremely, extremely good. You need two, in my opinion, you need two incredible midfielders. I thought Gravis was outstanding against the IFK, and I think that was partly why, for the time, you know, especially in the first half, that was why these two really outplayed Ellingmark, Hamzik, and Yusuf, which was quite surprising. You need two outstanding midfielders to really sustain a title challenge in this system. You need three centre backs who can really do a good job. You need someone who can press and go into the midfield if needed. So they've got to be extremely good. You need two extremely good wing backs. Not maybe as good as in a 5-3-2 because that's your only source of width, as I've mentioned. But they still need to be very, very disciplined to understand when to drop, when to play forward, which is a tough ask, really. It's not that simple. But really, I think the key is the creativity when you come into the 3-4-3 because you've got to get the balance between these two here correct. You've got to get that balance right. When does Edvardsen come inside, for example? When does Kralj go outside? They've got to make sure that they're connected at all times and have a good understanding. And I think it's a little bit harder to to create much with these two because if they're out wide, they can get maybe left out of the game. If they come inside, they can create kind of like a lot of space out wide for teams to attack into. So there's a lot of responsibility on these, and there's also a lot of responsibility on your forward because he's probably going to be a lone forward. He may not get the service from the two wide forwards. And if you look at a 5-3-2, which is what Conte sort of plays in, you know, he's had huge success, Antonio Conte, in this situation. You know, he's figured out a way of allowing teams to sort of press higher. He's got that midfield man marking system. He's got the blend right in terms of the pivot and the block. He knows how to defend it zonally. So, all in all, Steve, I think I probably lean towards a 3-5-2. But what I would say is if you can get the 3-4-3 right, you've got a very, very good football team to watch. And, you know, if I was an expert manager with a great sort of backing behind me, I do think there's a lot of options in this team that can make a very exciting team. But all in all, I'd probably say the reason that IFK lost this game is because they weren't tactically as well drilled and disciplined in that 5-3-2 as what was quite a fluid, well-drilled, disciplined Degerfors on the day.
Well, that was a very good discussion indeed. That ends part number 3. So yeah, we'd appreciate any feedback here from that. Tell us what you thought of the game. Tell us what you thought of the tactics. What do you prefer? 5-3-2, 3-4-3. What floats your boat? You know, everything's like that. So yeah, very good discussion, Jonathan. Very much enjoyed that. Alright, well that is going to be it for this particular episode. Thanks very much for listening or watching, whichever version you did. We would be greatly appreciative of any sort of feedback here. We, this is kind of our first real go at something like this in detail. I'm sure there was a few teething problems. Probably certain aspects of the production came across maybe a little bit grainy. But, you know, we'll do our best next time that we do this to sort of smarten things up a little bit more. But hopefully it came across really well. We do appreciate your time and support listening to this. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at Nordic Footpod, and you can follow myself, Steve Wyss, at Meatman Soccer, and Jonathan Fadugba at JF Football. Thanks very much to our patrons. There's not going to be an extra Patreon podcast this particular weekend because we've been so busy with this tactical thing. The next episode will be an Norwegian Eliteserien season preview. So next week there will not be anything Swedish related, I don't think. It's going to be all eyes on Norway again. So again, thanks very much. Really appreciate your time. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.